Alright, hello guys, how's it going? In today's video, we're going to talk briefly about the overall tropics, but I really want to focus on our tropical storm Sally because we are anticipating major impacts for a lot of Louisiana, Mississippi, Alabama, maybe even Florida there, with major flooding and also some very large amounts of storm surge as well. So you're going to want to stay tuned for all of that information coming up. Now, before I get started with this video though, I would ask that you do subscribe if you do like weather-related content, and also make sure to share this video with your friends, family, and social media. Now, I'd also ask that you check out our very exciting Patreon page in the description and the pinned comment down below. For today's comment of the day, obviously Sally is going to impact the United States, but do you think that any of these other systems that are in the Atlantic will make any sort of impact with the United States? If so, let me know which one and where, and I'll be picking one of those for tomorrow's video. Now, let's get into this video, and first things first, we're just going to take a look at this 5-day graphical tropical weather outlook, and this is the only time we're going to talk about any other tropical systems here. We see Hurricane Paulette is hitting Bermuda right now. Unfortunately, we are receiving some very major impacts there as a storm is approaching maybe Category 3 status. We see Tropical Depression Renee, again, very much so dissipating. We have seen Tropical Storm Teddy develop there. That one looks to be a fish storm, hopefully. And then we have our new Tropical Depression 21 alongside two tropical disturbances, that one in the Gulf of Mexico likely going to dissipate and do nothing. However, there is one moving offshore of Africa that has the same potential, and it's moving in the same direction as Teddy was. So it's very possible we see another tropical storm out of that one. Now, what we're going to do is we're just going to move on. That was the only time we're going to talk about the overall tropics. Like I said, in the coming days, we will once more be talking about just the tropics overall again. But for today, Sally takes the spotlight, obviously. So what we're going to do is we're going to move on and we're going to talk about Sally, the impacts, the cone forecast, wind, storm surge, rainfall, you name it. We're going to talk about it today. I think this is a very good time to make a very important disclaimer. I highly recommend, if you are in the impact zone of Tropical Storm Sally, I highly recommend you check out the National Hurricane Center for important life-saving information. Always seek official guidance from them. They are the professionals. Now, with that being said, let's carry on. And what we're going to do here, first off, is take a look at this cone forecast. Now, look, the National Hurricane Center is saying a hurricane at landfall potentially for anywhere from eastern Louisiana, potentially as far eastward as Alabama there. Also, as you can see, we have plenty of hurricane warnings up there in the red, tropical storm warnings there in the blues. So we are anticipating hurricane conditions for a lot of these regions here in eastern Louisiana there, and then as well as coastal Alabama and coastal Mississippi. All right, now let's take a look at that satellite imagery quickly. And as you can see, this storm actually, I think really it's going to make landfall as a strong tropical storm or a Category 1. And that's not to say there won't be major impacts, because actually the impacts are not going to be because of wind. It's actually going to be because of this very slow storm. We are anticipating high potential for 20 inches or more of rainfall, which is obviously extreme amounts of rain. That's where the major impacts are going to come from, as well as the storm surge. We're going to talk about all of those things moving forward, but this storm looks to be probably maximum a Category 1. Again, it could still surprise a lot of people, but we're getting very close to landfall, and we're still in that tropical storm status. I anticipate a stronger tropical storm or potentially a Category 1, with anything above that being pretty low in percentage. All right, now what we're going to do here is we're going to move on. We're going to start talking about the probability of tropical storm force winds, hurricane force winds, and then we're going to start moving on to most likely arrival time of winds, and then we're going to start talking about storm surge, rainfall, and all sorts of things like that. All right, now here we are taking a look at that tropical storm force wind speed probabilities. Basically, if you're in the greens, you're under 30% chance of tropical storm force winds. So it is possible, but not likely. In those yellows and oranges, you're around 30 to 70%, or probably around 50% there if you're in those oranges of tropical storm force winds. And then the reds and purples, that's where you're at 70% plus. So more likely than not, if you're in the reds, purples especially, you're going to very likely see tropical storm force winds at least, which is enough to cause damage, by the way. Hurricane force wind speed probabilities here, and as you can see, again, in the greens, under 30% chance, which is relatively high for hurricane force winds. And then we see those yellows and oranges, that's where you're 50-50. So the fortunate thing here is it's looking like a pretty limited chance for hurricane force winds. I think it is quite possible, especially if we see a little bit of a stronger storm than anticipated, let's say a stronger Category 1 or potentially Category 2. However, I'm not seeing that as a very likely thing at this point. Let's look at the most likely arrival time of tropical storm force winds, and this is another very useful tool here. And as you can see, later tonight, maybe I would say approximately 8 p.m. tonight, we're going to really start seeing those tropical storm force winds arrive for Alabama coast, Mississippi coast, and Louisiana coast, moving further inland by 2 a.m. there, as you can see, on Tuesday. And then later on the day, on Tuesday, maybe the afternoon hours, it's going to be pretty far inland there. All right, now here's the key messages for Tropical Storm Sally from the National Hurricane Center. First off, I highly recommend you go to their website, like I said before. But if you are not going to do that, I at least highly recommend you pause this video and just read through all of this, especially if you're expecting impacts. This really covers everything. I love the key messages, maps that they put out, or little graphics that they put out, because I think it really covers all the necessary points that you need to know, especially if you're expecting impact. So that's a very useful resource there. Now what we're going to do here is we're going to move on. We're going to start talking about storm surge, total rainfall, things of that nature. Maybe get a little bit into spaghetti models and intensity guidance, but overall, mostly just talking about the impacts here. All right, now here we are. First off, taking a look at that storm surge. And again, major storm surge actually. 7 to 11 feet of storm surge is very major for a storm that is this week. It's that location there in eastern Louisiana. It kind of is a bowl shape, and it allows for those storm surge. The storm surge kind of gets trapped in that little bowl shape, and we usually see worse storm surge right there, especially with the direction we're seeing this storm come in. But a general 1 to 3 feet all the way from central coastal Louisiana all the way down to the west coast of Florida. So a lot of storm surge there. We start to see the 2 to 4 feet amounts as you get closer to eastern Louisiana, portions of coastal Alabama and the panhandle of Florida there. The coastal Alabama, we're seeing 4 to 6 feet. Coastal Mississippi, 5 to 8 feet. So that's already moderate to major storm surge, enough to really cause some problems. So definitely, I'm expecting major impacts from storm surge, and certainly from rainfall here. As you can see, if you're in the greens, you're under 4 inches of rain, which is right around what I would consider the end of the slight to moderate ends of flooding. That's where you start to see some impacts in some areas, but not necessarily. It's once you get into that 4 to 6 in the yellows, the 6 to 10 in the oranges, that's where it starts to become major flooding issues. Once you get 1 feet of rain, that's obviously a lot alongside the storm surge, especially. In the reds, we expect 10 to 15 inches of rain. The pinks 15 to 20, and then in the purple 20 plus. So obviously extremely major flooding is possible here, especially from this rainfall alongside the storm surge, especially if your area is susceptible to flooding. Very, very major rainfall is expected. Here's your flash flood risk, and as you can see, we have a high risk of flash flooding in that purple area. That's the highest percent they go, 50% chance of flash flooding if you're in that area. Obviously, if it's 50-50, that's a ton. For something as extreme as flash flooding. In the reds, we see more of a moderate amount there, 20%. In the yellow, we see slight, and in the green, we see marginal. But overall, widespread flooding is expected because of just the extreme amounts of rainfall here. Now, what we're going to do is we're just going to move on. We're going to take a look at the low pressure location, spaghetti models, intensity guidance, and then we're going to just get into a little bit of some modeled rainfall, and then we're going to close out the video. First things first, here is our low pressure location, and as you can see, we're still a pretty long way out, but I'm expecting by tonight we're going to really start to see those windy impacts, the heavy rain moving onshore. I'm sure there's rainfall already moving onshore, especially for the Panhandle, Mississippi, Alabama, areas like that. Here's your spaghetti model guidance. Again, this used to be very wide out, but now it's really narrowed, which is a good sign that at least we know the general area this one's heading towards. The problem here is that in 48 hours, it's not going to move very far, even 72 hours. So we're going to get days of rainfall here, and that's what's going to really lead to a lot of that flooding that we talked about earlier. Here's the the GEFS ensemble spaghetti models here, and as you can see, a little less narrow, but I'm still thinking that eastern Louisiana, Mississippi impact is going to be the most likely area where we see this one reach landfall. Now here's the important thing here, the intensity guidance. Again, I said probably a stronger tropical storm or a weaker category 1 is the very most likely outcome here as far as intensity. But again, really, whether it's a tropical storm or a strong category 1, it's not going to impact very much how much rainfall you see. You're still going to see major flooding no matter how weak this storm is at landfall. The only thing that happens with a further intensified storm is that you start to see more wind alongside and possibly more storm surge as well. So that's some multiple impacts that could be affected. But the rainfall isn't going to isn't going to really be impacted too much by how intense this storm gets. Again, it is very possible that somehow we see a category 2 or 3. I don't want to say that that's impossible, but I'm thinking stronger tropical storm, weaker category 1 is really that sweet spot that I think is the most likely outcome. Here's your GFS total rainfall. And if you're in the greens, you're under half an inch. If you're in the blues, you're at half an inch to 2 inches. In the purples and pinks, you're at 2 to 6 inches of rain. If you're in those reddish colors, you're at 6 to 12 inches of rain. And in those golds, you're at 10 to 24 inches of rain, especially those brighter yellows is where you're above 20 inches of rain. So the GFS is right there alongside what the National Hurricane Center is saying. Here's your Canadian model. Same story here. We see a lot of those yellows widespread. The location changes a little bit. Here we see the Alabama and Mississippi border getting the most of it. And then here's your NAM model, a much higher resolution model. And we're seeing pretty much the same story. Those golds, pretty widespread. I expect some significant flooding, obviously bringing major impacts to a lot of areas. And this is actually more rainfall than we saw with Laura. So this storm isn't as bad as Laura, but it's just different. There is some things about this storm that are actually worse than Laura. Here is one example, the rainfall. All right, now here's our direct weather cone forecast. You're not seeing much different from what the National Hurricane Center is saying because I really like what they're saying with this one. I agree with it a lot. And as you can see, I think the most likely actual place for this one to hit is going to be somewhere in that Mississippi border. I think also it's possible we see a eastern Louisiana impact, potentially as far eastward as an Alabama or Panhandle, Florida impact. But again, that Mississippi coast seems to be the most likely area for this one to hit. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. For today's comment of the day, I asked you guys, how strong do you think Sally's going to get? And Fernando Urbina, I'm sorry if I'm saying her name wrong, said Sally can become a category 1, but everything can happen in the Gulf. And it's so true. I really like what you said there because I've seen it time and time again. You know, a storm looks like it's just going to be a tropical storm, and then all of a sudden, category 2, 3, 4, like nothing. And that's exactly what happened with Laura. Maybe we expected a category 1 or 2, but I mean, that one became a category 4 like a snap of a finger. And it happens time and time again in the Gulf. So I really like what you said there. Anyway, for today's Patron Highlight of the day, I want to thank you all for supporting the channel, but especially our Diamond patrons, Madbirds, Dan Hazard, Cindy Klein, Mark J, and Alicia Davis, alongside our Platinum patron, Donna Carnes. Anyway, guys, thank you so much for watching this video. Again, be sure to share it with your friends, family, and social media. I will see you guys in the next video.